Hello friends, and welcome to another mystery. Today's video, I tell you the story about the Dogman of Big Rapids. So sit back, relax, and let's get the scare over. Version 1. The most well-known version of Robert Fortney's encounter with the Dogman is the one where he was near the Muskegon River in Big Rapids, Michigan, in 1938. And had an unsettling experience with what he described as a bipedal, canine-like creature. Robert Fortney, 17 years old at the time, was reportedly near the banks of the Muskegon River when he encountered a pack of wild dogs. What made this encounter particularly disturbing was that one of these creatures stood out. It was larger, walking on two legs and had the appearance of a dog or wolf but with an almost human-like posture. This creature had glowing eyes that seemed to stare right through him. Feeling threatened, Fortney fired a shot at the creature with his rifle. While the shot scattered the other dogs, the upright creature did not immediately flee. Instead, it stood its ground for a moment, staring at Fortney before eventually turning and walking away on two legs, into the woods. This account is one of the earliest and most frequently cited stories of the Michigan Dogman, contributing significantly to the legend of the Dogman in Michigan and beyond. This version emphasizes the unusual nature of the creature, its bipedal stance, dog-like appearance, and eerie behavior, which is why it remains the most recognized version of the encounter. Version 2. Robert Fortney wasn't one to scare easy. At 17, he had grown up in Paris, Michigan, a small town nestled along the Muskegon River. The world outside might have been caught in the tail end of the Great Depression, but the forests around Paris were timeless, untouched by the troubles of the day. The woods had always been a place of solace for him, a place where the air was clear, the river sang, and the worries of the world seemed far away. But there were things in those woods that even Robert couldn't understand. It was a summer day in 1938, one of those hot, sticky days when the humidity clung to your skin and the air was thick with the smell of pine needles baking in the sun. Robert had decided to take his dog for a walk along the banks of the Muskegon River. It was a path he knew well, one he'd walked countless times before. He could navigate it blindfolded, and he often did, in a manner of speaking, his mind wandering as his feet found their way. But that day was different. That day, the woods felt strange. As he walked, the usual sounds of the forest, the chirping of birds, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, the distant gurgle of the river, seemed muted, as if the world had taken a step back and was holding its breath. Even his dog, usually so eager to romp through the underbrush, stayed close to his side, ears pricked and eyes scanning the trees as if sensing something just beyond the range of human perception. Robert didn't pay it much mind at first. The woods were full of animals after all, and it wasn't uncommon to stumble upon a deer or a fox or even a bear. But the more he walked, the more that uneasy feeling settled into his bones, a slow, creeping dread that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He was about a mile from town when he heard it, a low, deep growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. It wasn't the kind of sound you'd expect to hear in the woods. It wasn't the snarl of a wild dog or the growl of a bear. It was something different, something that made Robert stop dead in his tracks, his heart hammering in his chest. His dog froze too, tail between its legs, and let out a low whimper. That's when Robert knew, deep down, that something was wrong. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, straining to hear, to see whatever it was that had made that sound. But the woods were still, unnaturally still, as if every living thing had suddenly decided to go quiet, to hide from whatever was out there. Then he saw it. At first, it was just a shadow, a dark shape moving between the trees. But as it came closer, stepping into a shaft of sunlight, Robert's breath caught in his throat. The creature was tall, at least 6 feet, maybe more, and covered in thick black fur that seemed to absorb the light. It stood on two legs, its posture eerily human, but its head was that of a dog. Or a wolf. Long, pointed ears, a snout filled with sharp teeth, and eyes that burned with a sickly yellow light. For a moment, they just stared at each other, man and beast, locked in a gaze that Robert would never forget. The creature's eyes were intelligent, almost too intelligent, as if it were sizing him up, deciding whether he was worth the trouble. Robert's hand went to the revolver at his side, a .22 he carried more out of habit than necessity. But in that moment, it was the only thing standing between him and whatever this thing was. He didn't think, didn't hesitate. He drew the gun, aimed at the creature's chest, and fired. The shot rang out, echoing through the trees, but the creature didn't move, didn't flinch. It just kept staring at him, those yellow eyes unblinking, as if the bullet hadn't even touched it. For a split second, Robert felt a wave of cold terror wash over him. Then, as if deciding it had had enough, the creature turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows as silently as it had appeared. Robert stood there, gun still raised, heart pounding in his chest. His dog was at his feet, trembling, but otherwise unharmed. For a long time, he didn't move, didn't breathe, afraid that if he so much as blinked, the creature would come back. But the woods remained silent, empty, as if the encounter had never happened. It was only when his legs started to shake that he finally lowered the gun and turned back toward town. He walked quickly, his dog close on his heels, the feeling of being watched never leaving him. It wasn't until he could see the rooftops of Paris through the trees that he allowed himself to relax, just a little. But he knew deep down that things had changed. The woods weren't the same anymore. He wasn't the same anymore. When Robert got back to town, he went straight to the local diner. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else, where news traveled faster than the speed of sound, and where a good story was worth more than gold. Robert sat down at the counter, ordered a coffee, and waited until the usual crowd gathered around. Then he told them what had happened. At first, there was silence. The kind of silence that comes when people are trying to figure out if you're pulling their leg or if you've just lost your mind. But Robert was serious. Dead serious. And the more he talked, the more people started to believe him. Some folks laughed it off, said he must have been seeing things. Others nodded slowly, their faces pale, and muttered about old stories, old legends that had been passed down through the generations. Stories about a creature that walked like a man but had the head of a dog, a creature that was said to haunt the woods around Paris and Big Rapids, a creature that had been seen by more than one unlucky soul over the years. But no one had ever seen it as clearly as Robert had. No one had ever come face to face with it and lived to tell the tale. The sheriff was called, of course. It was his job to investigate things like this, no matter how strange they seemed. He listened to Robert's story with a skeptical eye, but there was something in the young man's voice, something in the way he described the creature, that made the sheriff take him seriously. They went back to the spot where Robert had seen the creature, a small group of men armed with rifles and flashlights, but there was nothing there. No tracks, no blood, no sign that anything out of the ordinary had happened. The sheriff gave Robert a look, one that said he wasn't sure if the boy was telling the truth or if he was just trying to get attention. But Robert knew what he had seen. He knew it was real. The story spread through Paris like wildfire. It wasn't long before folks all over town were talking about the Dogman, as they started calling it. Some said it was a werewolf, a creature of the night that had somehow crossed over into the daylight. Others said it was a spirit, a guardian of the woods that had been awakened by something, or someone, disturbing its territory. But no one knew for sure. And that was the scariest part. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, the story of the Dogman took on a life of its own. People started claiming they had seen it too, that they had heard its growl in the dead of night, or caught a glimpse of its yellow eyes watching them from the shadows. Some of these stories were undoubtedly made up, the product of overactive imaginations and too much time spent in the woods. But others were different. There were reports from all over the region, from Wexford County to Manistee to Traverse City. Lumberjacks, hunters, farmers, they all had their own tales to tell, and each one was eerily similar to Robert's. A creature that walked on two legs covered in fur, with the head of a dog or a wolf, and eyes that seemed to see right through you. The sightings weren't new either. The first recorded sighting of the Dogman dated back to 1887, when two lumberjacks in Wexford County claimed they had seen a creature that fit the description. Over the years, the legend had grown, passed down through generations, each retelling adding a new layer of fear and mystery. But it wasn't until Robert's encounter that the legend really took hold. His story was different, clearer, more detailed, more real. It wasn't just a campfire tale anymore. It was something that could happen to anyone, something that could happen to you. For Robert Fortney, the encounter with the Dogman was something he could never forget. He tried to go on with his life, to push the memory of those yellow eyes out of his mind, but it wasn't easy. Every time he walked through the woods, every time he heard a strange noise in the night, he was reminded of that moment when reality had shifted beneath his feet. He kept the revolver, though he rarely used it. It was a memento of that day, a reminder of how fragile the line was between the known and the unknown. The woods, once his sanctuary, had become a place of unease, a place where the rules of the natural world no longer applied. He avoided them whenever he could, and when he did venture out, it was with a sense of foreboding, as if he were walking through a place that was no longer entirely real. The legend of the Dogman grew over time, fed by sightings and stories from those who claimed to have seen it or heard its growls. The creature became a fixture of local folklore, a tale told around campfires and shared in conversations. Some saw it as a guardian spirit, others as a harbinger of doom. But for many, it was a reminder that there were things out there that defied explanation, things that lurked in the shadows just beyond the reach of light. Robert Fortney lived to a ripe old age, but the encounter never left him. He spoke of it rarely, and when he did, it was with a detached, almost clinical tone, as if the horror of that day had become a distant memory, something he had come to terms with but never fully understood. His story, though, remained a cornerstone of the Dogman legend, a real-life encounter that anchored the myth in reality. When he passed away in 1981, the town of Paris remembered him as a man who had faced something beyond the ordinary, something that had left its mark on him forever. The woods remained a place of mystery, and the legend of the Dogman continued to haunt the collective imagination of those who dared to listen. The woods around Paris, Michigan, still hold their secrets, and the Dogman remains a part of that enigmatic landscape. For those who venture into the forests, the story serves as a warning, a reminder that some places are better left unexplored, and that the shadows that dance on the edge of the light might hold truths we are not meant to know. As dusk falls and the wind whispers through the trees, the legend endures, woven into the fabric of the land. The Dogman of Big Rapids is a reminder that in the vast untamed wilderness, there are mysteries that defy understanding, and some encounters are destined to leave an indelible mark on those who come face to face with them. And so, the story of Robert Fortney and the Dogman lives on, a haunting testament to the thin veil that separates our world from the unknown, and a chilling reminder that sometimes, the things we cannot explain are the things that frighten us the most. So, what do you think about Robert's story? Do you believe him, or do you think he was just looking for attention? Let me know down in the comments your opinions. And until I upload another video for your entertainment, thank you for watching, and may God bless you and your families. Stay safe.